The topic is theater in the Philippines, history and prospects. Uh, to understand the diversity of theatrical forms coexisting in different parts of the country today, the lecture aims first to describe chronologically the most important forms of theater in the Philippines, from the earliest beginnings to the present. And second, to evaluate the content, function, and orientation of these performances in relation to the welfare of the majority of Filipinos. And three, to reflect on the prospects of a contemporary theater that is responsive to the challenges of globalization, the dominance of film and television, and the socio-political conditions of Philippine society today. There are terms I'd like to define. Theater here will refer to any kind of performance that involves mimesis or imitation of action taken from real life. Mimesis is really the soul of theater in any culture. It may or may not require a physical theater or stage, a written script, sets and costumes, or a director, which only came with Spain, but simply an actor performing mimetic actions in a designated area. Philippines refers to the nation, its peoples, the geographic areas as defined by the nation's constitution and the United Nations, and the customs and traditions that the people have evolved over time as a response to their natural and man-made environments. History refers to the diachronic development of theater, not according to historical periods per se, but the cultural traditions introduced during a historical period whose transformations may go beyond the historical periods which gave birth to them. So, in the Spanish period, for example, the comedia was introduced, but it would be wrong to think that the comedia stopped after the Spanish period, right? Because it continued even up to the present. Okay? Prospects refers to the creation of a dynamic Filipino theater responsive to the challenges facing Philippine society today. This is the outline. The dramatic forms that flourished and continue to flourish among the different peoples of the archipelago include the indigenous theater, which is seen in mimetic rituals, mimetic dances, mimetic costumes, and dance dramas. Plays with Hispanic influence, among which are the comedia, the sinaculo, the religious playlets, the Zarzuela, and the drama. Third, the theater with Anglo-American influence, which encompasses vaudeville and the Western plays in English. And lastly, the modern original plays by Filipinos, which employ a range of styles from realism to epic theater to revitalize traditional forms. The first section, the indigenous traditions and transformations. You notice that it's not historical periods, it's traditions, no? And transformations, because they continue up to the present. Over thousands of years, various peoples came to settle in the islands, now known as the Philippines, bringing with them their original cultures, whose material and non-material expressions are still evident among the cultural minorities that comprise about 17% of the country's population today. In these cultures, the mimetic rituals, mimetic dances, mimetic costumes, and dance dramas are still performed with vitality by the different indigenous communities. They are held to solicit blessings on a person's birth, baptism, circumcision, or initial menstruation, courtship, wedding, sickness, and death. In other words, important stages in one's life. Or to celebrate tribal activities like hunting, fishing, rice planting and harvesting, and going to war. In most rituals, the first of the forms, a native shaman, female or male, variously called mambunong, payok, or babaylan, goes into a trance as the spirit that he or she is calling upon possesses him or her. While entranced, the shaman partakes of the sacrificial offering, which may be a chicken, a pig, a carabao, or simply rice uncooked, or in cakes, rice wine, and betel nut. In this particular case, it's the person that is offering the sacrifice, let's say the sick person, no, is represented by the sacrificial animal, right? So there is mimesis, it's mimetic. The shaman represents the spirit, and then the animal represents the sick person. And the act of taking the life of the animal is actually a mimetic taking of the life of the sick person, right? So this is one example of among the Tagbanwa of Palawan, the ritual of the Diwata is held to ask the supreme deity Magindusa and the spirits of ancestors for a bountiful harvest and for the well-being of the supplicants. Right? So this was taken in 1963 in Palawan. Mimetic dances are also considered as proto-dramas. A majority of these dances, performed during communal feasts, depict important tribal activities such as hunting, fishing, gathering with wild honey, frog hunting, rice planting and harvesting, as well as head taking. The example is this Matiksulog frog hunting dance. The war dance of the Higaonon mimics the movements of model warriors as they fight with spears and shields. Other indigenous dances are playful imitations of animals like the monkey, fish, and butterfly. The Kadalblila of the Tiboli interprets the movements of a bird with the aid of a malong. Mimetic too are some of the customs associated with courtship, marriage, and death. Of the courtship customs, an old form that has survived is the Cebuano Balitaw, which features antiphonal songs performed by male and female who debate on love as well as the problems of married couples and rural workers. These are remnants of the old Balitaw group in Cebu that we documented. Dance dramas are typified by the Maranao Singkil, which dramatizes how Prince Bantugan saves Princess Gandingan from the earthquake and the evil spirits of the forest. Right? So that's from the Darangan, which is the epic of the Maranaos. Okay. Analysis. As a whole, indigenous dramas are integrated into the lives of indigenous Filipinos. These rituals, dances, and customs depict the natural phenomena that the community must live with, as well as the beliefs, the activities, and the material culture of the tribe. They answer the basic needs of the tribe for a good harvest and victory in war, as well as the physical and spiritual well-being of the sick, the newly born, the youth, and the newlywed members of the tribe. They bind the members of the tribe in a stronger bond for the common good. The customs associated with courtship, marriage, and death provide a way of expressing personal emotions in a socially accepted way, and of informing all of bonds and values that will have to be respected by everyone, so that harmony may reign in society. Second, the Hispanic traditions and transformations. From 1565 to 1898, Spain colonized the Philippines, subjugating the peoples and subjecting them to colonial impositions like taxes, monopolies, and forced labor. In the colonial project, Catholicism was used by the Spanish colonizers to maintain firm control over the people. An effective tool used for the purpose was theater, which the friars employed or encouraged both as a tool for proselytization and as a magnet to attract the natives to settle in the Spanish-controlled Pueblo, which constituted the foundation of Spain's empire in the archipelago. The Spanish regime gave rise to secular plays, usually staged to celebrate town fiestas, and religious plays which illustrate Christian teachings during important Catholic liturgical feasts or seasons like Christmas and Lent. Many of these are performed to our own day. Most important of all the plays is the Comedia, a play in verse introduced into the country from Spain through Mexico in the 16th century and indigenized and institutionalized by the 19th. The theatrical spectacle, which takes from 3 to 15 hours to perform, so kuminsan 1 day, 2 days, or 3 days to perform, no? In installments, has conventions of elaborate marches, lengthy choreographed fighting between individuals and or armies, and magical artifices, which such as the Virgin Mary appearing to infidels, or a huge flower unfolding to reveal a princess, or a bird swooping down on the baby Florante. The Commedia has two principal types: the secular, which concentrates on epic stories of love, honor, and vengeance, and the religious, which narrates the lives of patron saints. Secular Commedia derives stories from local versions of European metrical romances, for example, Doce Pares de Francia, which usually depict the conflict between Christian princes and princesses and their Moorish counterparts. This is an example of the Commedia. A secular commedia is the Aracchio of Nueva Ecija, which is still alive, which revolves around the search by Elena and Constantino for the cross of Christ and the Moros that they had to battle in that search. Peñaranda is known for its versions of the Aracchio. The religious commedia, or Comedia de Santo, was used by Spanish friars to teach Christianity and inculcate colonial values of obedience. The Comedia de San Miguel of Iligan City, I think medyo wala na ito ngayon, tells the story of Luzbel's rebellion against God and his defeat in the hands of Michael the Archangel. The full-blown religious play is the Cenáculo, which probably saw light in the mid-18th century. Staged commercially or as community activity during Lent, the Cenáculo is a dramatization of the Passion, the verse narrative on the life and sufferings of Christ, and other apocryphal stories. The first Passion in Tagalog was published in 1703. In Tambo, Buhi, Camarines Sur, the Passion play known as Tanggal, yun ang tawag nila sa Cenáculo, is performed for 3 days with financial support from the barrio. As older Tangalistas chant the Bicol Passion, younger members dramatize the actions narrated by the chant. Didactic like the Comedia and Cenáculo are the playlets. These are the short dramatizations which embellish the Catholic liturgy or dramatize more fully the events narrated by that liturgy, especially Christ's birth, passion, death, and resurrection. First, the Christmas playlets. During the Christmas season, the Pananuluyan or Kagharong in Bicol dramatizes through a street procession the search by the Virgin Mary and Saint Joseph for an inn in Bethlehem on Christmas Eve. The Pastores in Bicol are a group of 12 males and females in colorful costumes dancing and singing Spanish and native Christmas songs in front of different houses where they're given food or alms. Actually, nagkakarol sila. Yun yung point actually. In Gasan, Marinduque, the Tatlong Hari reenacts the episodes in the search for and adoration of the infant Jesus by the three kings. Right? Marinduque lang yata yung merong full version of this play. Then, in Lent, the Lenten season has playlets like the Osana, which features the blessing of the palms and reenacts Christ's triumphal entry into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. The Via Crucis is a procession of the image of the Nazareno, Christ carrying the cross, which stops at 14 stations of the cross. In Paite, Laguna, this is something to see. The meeting of Christ and his mother, as well as Christ and Veronica, are dramatized with chanted dialogue and moving images. So, pinapagalaw nila from the inside. So, ito si Veronica, she wipes the face of Christ. Gumagalaw yung yung kanyang kamay, no? The Huling Hapunan of Gasan, Marinduque reenacts the Last Supper in an actual dinner. So, pansit at saka lapu-lapu, kinain nila, eaten by the priest standing for Christ and the 12 men playing the apostles. This follows the washing of the feet. So, sa simbahan yung washing of the feet, tapos they repair to the sponsor's house, the hermano's house, and that's where they eat. Okay. On Good Friday, the Siete Palabras of Betis, Pampanga features a life-size image of Christ hanging on the cross, which moves its head each time one of the 7 last words is spoken, amidst thunder and lightning. So may effect siya, no? Actually, may pinapaputok sa likod nung Kristo. Okay? Alright. The Salubong dramatizes the meeting of the risen Christ and the Virgin on Easter Sunday morning in dance and song. This is climaxed by the removal of the Virgin's black veil by a little angel. In Angono, this is the picture here, the dance called Bate is performed by the Tenienta and the Capitana sequentially, each brandishing a flag in her hands. Right? So the Bate is actually a flag dance. In this case, parang praising, no, the Virgin and Christ, the risen Christ. The Judas shows the burning of the effigy of Judas Iscariot on the morning of Easter Sunday. Firecrackers masked as blackbirds swoop down from the 4 corners of the patio and explode first the traitor's hands, feet, torso, and finally, nagkakagulo yung tao dun sa ulo kasi susabog yung ulo niya. So, everybody really goes mad over that. On Easter Sunday also, the Morionan or Moriones of Marinduque enacts the story of the Roman soldier Longinos or Longino, who, while guarding the tomb of Christ, witnesses the resurrection, proclaims Christ's divinity around town, and is therefore beheaded by Pilate's soldiers. Ito yung beheading. Pugutan ang tawag nila sa Marinduque. No? A playlet performed in honor of Santiago Matamoros, and this is probably one of the most ancient playlets that we have, is the Moros y Cristianos, which depicts the conflict between Christians and Moors. In the sayaw, iba-iba yung tawag sa kanya, no? Sa iba-ibang lugar, pero essentially it's the same thing. It's Moors and Christians fighting in dance. In Ibahay Aklan, it's called the sayaw. The enemies end up adoring the image of the Santo Niño. So, interesting kasi there are two camps, there's a long road, and then they send ambassadors to each other, and then finally they fight, and then matatalo, siyempre lagi natatalo yung mga Moro, di ba? Kasi Kristiyano yung gumagawa ng play. And then in the end, all of them, including the Moros, adore the Christ child. Okay, so obviously propaganda for Spain. No? Okay, analysis. The secular and religious plays and playlists are drastically different in content, function, and orientation from the indigenous plays. While the indigenous plays depict the life and activities of the tribe, the dramas with Spanish influence either showcase European stories of princes and princesses from idealized worlds, or narrate the lives of Jesus Christ and the saints of the Catholic Church, which were introduced into the country by Spanish friars. The Comedia also propagated, and in most cases continues to propagate, a colonial mentality that looks up to the European as superior in race and religion, even as the Cenacula and playlets on the passion and death of Jesus Christ and the lives of saints tended to create a masochistic attitude towards suffering. Parang suffering is good. Right? And to forge a passive will that bows to colonial authorities and its hierarchy of power. In general, these plays contributed to the shaping of the native Filipino as colonial or Indio during the Spanish period, ensuring Spain's continued dominance over the islands for centuries. Needless to say, these plays discouraged the development of a critical and decisive citizenry. This is one of the oldest prints of the Comedia in Bicol, in one of the travelers' accounts. Just the same, ito yung so in other words, ginamit laban sa atin during the colonial period for the benefit of Spain. But the phenomenon always is that the natives reinterpret the forms to their advantage. Right? So, the Filipinos indigenized the Comedia by treating it as a sacrificial offering in lieu of the chicken or the pig. You remember the rituals? And panata, to ask favors for the deity like the good harvest or recovery from sickness, and in our time, passing an exam or getting a visa to work abroad. Kaya relevant siya hanggang ngayon. Right? Doon sa mga interview ko sa Araccio, itong kanilang hinihingi. Yan, kasi they want to work abroad. So, they participate in the Comedia, and in return, they want the deity to give their request. No? Moreover, the Filipinos used the character of the pusong or jester, yung trickster, to express their complaints against the abuses of authority with impunity. Ito yung, you don't see this in the text of the Comedia because all of this is ad-lib. Right? But the jester or the pusong is the one that is able to comment on the political problems or social problems of the time. Okay? Unfortunately, syempre, hindi recorded, no? But in Orosman at Safira, meron siyang makikita mo yung mga comments niya, no? Finally, progressive artists today use the Christ story to highlight Christ's championing of the poor against their oppressors. For example, during the revolution against Spain, so the whole thesis of Ileto is that, no? Na ginamit yung consciousness ng passion, not the passion itself, no? To form, an organization, a religious framework for the revolution. and today against anti-urban poor government decrees. Right? So in other words, the Christ story was a foreign story, and it was used against us during the Spanish period. But we have, through the centuries, made it our own, and have used it, in fact, to express our own interpretations of our realities. Right? Okay. In Hispanic traditions, transformations, two. Okay? Bakit two? Kasi yung na-introduce ang mga ito ng panahon ng Kastila, pero nag-flourish lamang sila sa panahon ng Amerikano. Okay? Introduced into the country by Spanish artists around 1879, the Zarzuela had its heyday from 1900 to 1940 in Manila and the provinces. Usually in 3 acts with music and dancing interspersed with prose dialogue, the Zarzuela focuses on the love story between members of the upper class, spiced up with comic love episodes between servants. The play exposed itong mga themes: usurers, corrupt politicians, oppressive landlords, lazy husbands whose husbandry is wasted on cockfighting and other social vices. And lately, sa Ilocos ito, students hooked on drugs and Saudi recruiters who take advantage of native workers from the provinces. One of the most popular zarzuela of all time is the Lagang Bukid, 1917, which tells of the love between a pretty young flower girl, Angelita, and a young handsome law student, Cipriano, who triumph over the machinations of the rich old man, Don Silvestre, who wants to get Angelita at all costs. May dirty old man involved. Okay. Siyempre, hindi siya magtatagumpay. Nagtanan yung dalawa. Okay, introduced from Spain in the 19th century, the drama, okay, so keep this in mind. Drama in Tagalog and in the Philippines refers to one specific type of play. Hindi yan yung drama in general in English, right? Ito yung drama when you say, ang drama-drama mo naman. Yun. Ang root word kasi nun are the dramas that you hear on radio, na may sampalan, sigawan, etc. And the telenovelas. Because that's where the drama went into later, right? So it's a play in verse and or prose, usually prose, and usually in one act. So maiksi lang siya. Like this Zarzuela, it often revolves on aspects of Filipino contemporary life, like divorce, gambling, and other social vices, usually in the framework of a love story. During its golden age from 1900 to 1940, kasabay ng Zarzuela, the drama was performed in a series of 3-in-1 performances or by itself before a Zarzuela. Like the Zarzuela, it could be presented commercially or as a community activity on a proscenium stage, in a teatro, or an open-air rural entablado using telons or backdrops. Ito yung example ng isang, this is a Zarzuela from the 1920s. Right? It's a picnic scene. So nakabalintawak yung mga babae. Notice the telons at the back. Right? So the drops siya, tumataas mga babae. Okay. The drama had 3 types. The drama romantico or melodrama aims to make people cry. Right? Such is Veronidia, 1919, by Ciro H. Panganiban, which depicts the tragic death of a divorcee who only wants to visit her first husband, who wants to see her before he passes away. Pero ayaw ng pangalawang asawa. So, pinatay siya. Nagselos kasi. Melodramas also revolved around the love between the rich and the poor, unfaithful husbands and suffering wives, prodigal children, and children separated at birth from their parents who rediscover later that they are brothers and sisters. So, di ba telenovela na ABS yan? Walang nagbago actually. Pinahaba lang ng telenovela. It's exactly the same situations and the same endings, right? Okay. This is a production of Babaylan of Veronidia. By the way, yung divorce, kasi the Americans were trying to introduce divorce. Siyempre, Catholic Philippines reacted, right? So, ito yung play. Pinapakita, pag nag-divorce ka, ito mangyayari sa'yo. It's actually propaganda against divorce. Right? The drama comico is exemplified by Julian Cruz Balmaceda's Sino Ba Kayo, 1943, which weaves its hilarious situations around the mistaken identities of a widower and his pretty daughter, and a widow, the widower's new wife, and her handsome son. Okay? This Aurelio Tolentino, Aurelio Estanislao as the widower. The drama Simbolico, pangatlong klase, popular in Manila and environs from 1898 to 1905, exposed and attacked America's colonization of the islands. Aurelio B. Tolentino's Kahapon Ngayon at Bukas, 1903, chronicles the struggle of Inang Bayan. So, allegorical siya. Ito si Inang Bayan in the PETA production, nasa gitna, Philippines, and her children under the leadership of Taga-Ilog. Taga-Ilog would be the revolutionary Filipinos, to overcome the oppressors in the country's history, the Chinese, the Spanish, and the Americans. Interesting, si Tolentino depicted the Chinese as colonizers. So, could he have seen something at the time? Okay. Analysis. In general, the drama Romantico and Comico and the Zarzuela represent a significant development in Philippine theater history. Unlike the Commedia and the Cenaculo, they introduced a more realistic, albeit still idealized, portrayal of Filipino life and culture, showcasing not only Filipino costumes and sets, but typical Filipino characters, dialogue, and situations as well. So hindi na mga prinsipe at prinsesa ng Albania o ng Europa, mga tunay na tao na types na nakikita mo sa tunay na buhay. Unlike the colonial Commedia and Cenaculo, these forms trained their sights on current issues of Philippine society, launching diatribes against those that they perceived as social offenders. Right? So kung ano yung problema sa lipunan, yun yung nare-reflect. Right? Pero, notice, hindi political. Okay? Kasi pinagbawal ng Amerikano yung political issues, so na-concentrate siya dun sa mga social issues. If this plays can be faulted, it would be for the simplistic way in which they solve the very real problems that they present. Coincidences, accidents, and other deus ex machina are used to eliminate all obstacles. Di ba, familiar yan? To come to not a happy but a correct ending. Right? Ibig sabihin, morally acceptable or politically acceptable to the establishment. No? By a stroke of the pen, the villains all mend their evil ways and become model members of the establishment, church, and community. Right? So kung merong kabit yung lalaki, tatalikdan niya yung kabit niya at babalik siya sa asawa niya. Kaya ganun ang ending. Kasi masisensor kapag hindi. Kahit totoong nangyayari yun, hindi mo pwedeng pakita sa dula. Okay. The seditious dramas, however, the drama Simbolico, are an exception because they dare to paint the actual bloody struggle of Filipinos against American colonizers, hoping thus to enlighten and exhort the Filipino masses to support the revolutionary movement based in the mountains, and thereby prevent the country's colonization by another Western power. These dramas represent a high point in the development of Philippine theater. So, by the way, yung period na to, 1903, 1902, 1903, 1904, hanggang 7, the writers of the drama and the actors, etc., were actually part of the whole revolutionary plan. So three-pronged yung attack. First, Sakay's forces in the countryside, armed, right, revolution. Second, the laborers. So ang labor group harnessed din for that purpose. Also, Iglesia Filipina Independiente. And then third, the journalists and the playwrights. The three-pronged attack yun to be able to remove the Americans from the country. Okay, the Americans won. So, the American traditions and transformations. The United States entered the Philippines in May 1898, posing as an ally of the Philippine Revolution against Spain. But after buying the colony from Spain for $20 million, the U.S. proceeded to colonize the country. To quote-unquote pacify and civilize the Filipinos, America established a countrywide educational system in English and introduced the cultural forms that effectively Americanized the tastes and aspirations of Filipinos. The American colonial regime from 1901 to 1946, the direct colonial regime, had a profound effect on 20th century Philippine theater. which is seen in the vaudeville, or local version of American vaudeville, and the Western plays presented in English or later in Filipino translation adaptation. The vaudeville, introduced by Borromeo Lu, also known as, the real name is Luis Borromeo, in the 1920s, vaudeville is a potpourri of songs, dances, and comedy skits which showcases what is popular in the United States at a given time. Right? Hindi siya play, actually kung siya variety show. During the Japanese occupation, the vaudeville expanded to include a short melodrama at the end, becoming known as the stage show. This became the most popular entertainment in Manila at the time because films stopped. And they stopped making films kasi pinagbawal ng mga Hapon ang pag-import ng film stock. So, wala nang pelikula. So, lahat ng mga actors and directors from the film world went to the theater. After the war, the return to popularity of the movies drove the stage show into small, cheap theaters or to open-air stages in the provinces. In Manila, they became the burlesque shows. Yung mga babaeng nagugubad and so on. Yeah. Okay. Ngayon, through the westernized educational system in English, Filipinos were introduced to quote-unquote legitimate theater, or plays considered as artworks in the production of Western classics, especially Shakespearean tragedies and comedies in the 1920s and 1930s. Okay, analysis. Vaudeville and the Western plays presented by Filipinos contain very little of Philippine life and culture in them. The vaudeville had Filipinos belting or crooning American pop songs to approximate the original American singers. Di ba? Yung local version of. Okay, so, for example, gyrating like Elvis Presley, so, meron tayong si Eddie Mesa is the Elvis Presley of the Philippines. Actually, Elvis Presley marami sa Pilipinas. Meron pang babae na Elvis Presley. Right? Ganon yung naging ideal natin, no? Yung bang kumanta ka na exactly katulad nung nasa American original, right? So, complement yung pag sinabing kumanta ka na plakang-plaka. In other words, you sound exactly like the recording, right? Okay, or flexing their limbs in the air, a la Fred Astaire. In the same manner, the Western plays had Filipinos imitating Laurence Olivier's accent to be convincing as Macbeth, right? The picture is very interesting. It is a picture of Hamlet with Onofre Pagsanghan in his famous role as Ophelia. Oh, yan siya. Yan siya. That's Onofre Pagsanghan. He became famous for that role. Kasi by the way, sa Ateneo ng araw, you cannot have female and males on the same stage. So all female roles were played by males, right? So, yan. Isikwan yan, right? Furthermore, these shows transported audiences into the American dreamland, to the American songs, dances, and production numbers on stage, while richer Filipinos tried to get their catharsis from empathy with Hamlet, Julius Caesar, or Macbeth. Right? Because of their proven effectivity in Americanizing Filipinos, vaudeville and Western plays helped to make more acceptable to the Filipino America's colonial rule, and even its continuing presence in the Philippines after 1946 to our day. Just the same, okay, so may positive aspect ito. Although the Filipinos were Americanized in thought, taste, and temper by these plays, so were they equipped with many dramatic theories and styles that opened new avenues for growth and expanded the horizons of theatrical expression of Filipino playwrights, directors, actors, designers, and stage managers. Even as foreign plays strengthened the colonial bias, they also introduced many styles of Western theater and the theater of Asia, Africa, and South America that eventually enabled the Filipino to write and stage plays that engage with the realities confronting their society. For example, the realism, which is a style taken from the West, right, was actually used very effectively by Filipinos to describe their own kinuha yung technique and then in-apply doon sa Philippine realities. Okay. Contemporary trends and transformations. So hindi traditions kasi maaga pa para sabing tradition. I divide this into three, okay, yung contemporary period. Kasi iba-ibang republic talaga yun eh. Republic 3, 1946 to 72 is the first one. The first republic was the Malolos Republic. Okay? The second republic was the Japanese-sponsored republic of 1943-45. And then the third republic is 1946 to 72. After the war, America, quote-unquote, gave the Philippines its independence, inaugurating the Third Republic of the Philippines. But even as America relinquished direct rule over the country, it turned the country into a neo-colony through treaties like the Bell Trade Act and the Laurel-Langley Agreement. And as America continued to control the country's economy and politics, it went on to dominate its culture through Hollywood films and American programs on radio and television, and more importantly, through the educational system with the help of American educated Filipino teachers and administrators, the American-inspired curricula, and the obligatory use of the English language as primary language of instruction. So, kaya ako nag-English ngayon kasi galing din ako dyan sa miseducation na yan. Okay. Through English classes, students learned and often staged Greek classics like Antigone, Shakespeare, Molière, Edmond Rostand, Cyrano de Bergerac, as well as Ibsen, Chekhov, Williams, and Miller. Continue to be staged in school and professional stages up to now, di ba? This Macbeth, the famous Macbeth of Orlando Tino, yung last production niya. And even when Filipino playwrights began to write original plays, they had to use English to be considered legitimate, right? As Severino Montano and Wilfrido Maria Guerrero did. This is a infamous play of La Leonor Rivera ni Montano, right? By the 1950s, the style of realism, which seeks to create well-rounded characters, emerged as a dominant style. It followed two tendencies. The psychological, which focuses on the problems of real, of and between characters who are endowed with specific backgrounds and character spines, and B, the social, which situates and roots individual problems within the larger framework of a class society. Okay. Outstanding psychological study of character is found in Nick Joaquin's A Portrait of the Artist Filipino, 1955. This is the original production, by the way. So Candida was played by Daisy Avellana, and Paula was played by Dolly Benavides. That is she here, right? Which dramatizes the conflict between the old Hispanic culture and the new American way of life before the war, and the tragic story of the two sisters who are caught in between. Social realism was pioneered by Alberto Florentino in plays like The World is an Apple, which shows how a poor man steals to buy medicine for his child. Ironically, the poor, uneducated man in this play must use the English language. So yung mga slum dwellers, nag-English sila lahat. With the rise of nationalism in the late 1960s, however, the Filipino language began to assert itself, first in the translations of Western plays, both the classics and the modern plays, as pioneered by Rolando Tino and Peta. Okay, yung dalawang yun nag-start. Actually, si Rolando Tino with Death of a Salesman, right? Pahima ka sa isang hente. And then Peta with Duran Mat's The Visit, which was titled Doña Clara. Okay. The same year. By the end of the 1970s, Filipino had become the language of necessity. When activist groups like Panday Sining, Tanghalang Bayan, and Kamanyang created plays to politicize the broad masses on the issues of the three evils: U.S. imperialism, bureaucrat capitalism, and feudalism, and the corruption and fascism of the Marcos government. This is a very rare photograph of Tanghalang Bayan doing the sinakulo, the activist sinakulo with ang masa ang kanilang Kristo. Right? Tapos nakita mo yung mga si imperialismo itong naka top hat. Right? U.S. imperialism. Okay. Republic 4, 1972 to 86. That's the martial law period. By the way, all these republics had constitutions of their own, very interestingly. After martial law was declared in 1972, Filipino theater artists either continued staging translations and adaptations of foreign plays as if nothing happened, as Teatro Pilipino and Dulaang UP did, right? Or staged contemporary Broadway plays, as Repertory Philippines did and continues to do, or produced original plays of psychological and social realism, as Bulwagang Gantimpala did, or created original plays with more radical socio-political themes using styles of, quote-unquote, the theater of circumvention, kasi hindi pwedeng diretso martial law, makukulong ka, to evade imprisonment or censorship, as UP Repertory and PETA did. Ito yung glory days ng PETA talaga. No? PETA led in the creation of a people's theater, not only in Manila but all over the country. This theater, which had been influenced by Bertolt Brecht and Augusto Boal, among others, evolved styles tailored to their audiences and the changing political conditions. It often used allegory, symbols, dances, songs, stylized or minimal sets, costumes, and props to foreground its political messages. So the following are some of these types. First, the documentary play. The documentary style was employed in order to relate historical events or persons to the present. So in other words, you cannot talk about the present, so you talk about the past and draw parallels between the past and the present. Okay? Using narrators and slides of newspaper clippings, Al Santos' Mayo 21 at iba pang kabanata, 1977, traces the life of Valentin de los Santos through 3 periods of struggle against colonial rule to explain why Tatang was obsessed with freedom and why he founded the Lapiang Malaya. Most of you would not have been around, but there was a big incident then. Itong Lapiang Malaya is actually a millenarian movement. They believe in freedom, pero alam mo na religious yung kanilang framework, no? So they led Tatang led a march, no, of his members to Malacanang to talk to Marcos. Hinarang na Metrocom sa TAF, pinagbabaril yung mga tao. So, ang daming namatay, tapos si Tatang mismo was imprisoned and then later apparently killed in prison. The Brechtian style, with touches of absurdism, is evident in Ang Sistema ni Professor Tucot, which satirizes authoritarianism in the classroom and in society. So ginawa niyang parallel yung okay. Typical of the inexpensive, portable, and short plays called Tula-Dula, which were evolved for symposia or rallies, no? Kasi mabilis, 2 characters lang. In Josef Lacabas, ang mga kagilagilalas na pakikipagsapalaran ni Juan de la Cruz, 1976. A poem which narrates one day in the life of an ordinary Filipino who realizes that wherever he may go, he has no real rights. Kahit iihi siya, magalit yung pader, sabihin, huwag ka umihi dito. Okay. The successful use of ethnic arts to convey the problems of Mindanao, like the insurgency, militarization, landlordism, exploitation of the ethnic communities, and land grabbing, are seen in Rodolfo Galenzoga's Maranatha and Sining Cambayoca's Halik sa Kampilan. The latter uses the Bayok and the Pilandok character to comment on the abusive martial law leaders. Alright, Republic 5, 1986 to the present. After the EDSA Revolt of 1986, the new democratic space allowed theater artists to widen their subject matter as well as their forms of expression. Realism came back in the straight play, either emphasizing the psychology of individuals, as in Kanaka, Balintagos, these Aureus Solitos, mga buhay na apoy, about a woman who must come to terms with her ethnic identity and past traumas, or the social evils besetting the nation, as in Maluhakov's Anatomiya ng Korupsyon, which depicts the modus operandi of corruption in a typical government office. Western-type musicals have been adopted by Filipino playwrights and composers who have indigenized them in content and form. Notable are Lisa Magtoto's Care Divas, about the plight of gay caregivers in Israel. Nasa picture ito. And Floyd Quintos's And St. Louis Loves Them, Filipinos, about the Igorot, Bagobo, and other tribal peoples exhibited at the 1904 St. Louis Exposition. Dance dramas, which use ethnic music and movements in order to dramatize both traditional folklore and contemporary myths, include Denisa Reyes' Diablos in the picture, which uses a Bagobo tale about the evil bird Minokawa, and Rodi Bera's Ibalong, a contemporary interpretation of mythological characters from Bicol epics. Traditional forms, still popular among the masses, have been imbued with positive contemporary images. Al Santos says, ang kalbaryo ng maralitang tagalunsod that's in the picture exposes the suffering of the urban poor in Metro Manila because of laws that discriminate against the poor. Itong play na to was on the street. So ginawa nilang sinakulo for Holy Week, right? Nagsimula sa Smoky Mountain. So doon yung condemnation by Pilate of Christ, and there were 13 Christs. Yung Christ yung mga naka-maskara. Yung maskara pattern of the Quiapo Nazareno. And the 13 represented the 13 urban communities. Right? So, pinarade sila down the streets, tapos they went to Malacanang, the Malacanang area, and then it ended with in the crucifixion in Quiapo. Max Alianiga's Principe Rodante, 1962, uses all the conventions of the Comedia in Parañaque but rejects the divisive anti-Muslim message. So ginawa talaga siya para dito actually ang villain is not di ba sa Moro-Moro kasi religion yung basis. Pag Moro ka, masama ka. Pag Kristiyano ka, mabuti ka. Dito, yung villain actually is a Christian prince who does not want to respect the rules of the tournament. These are children, by the way, already being taught the Comedia in Parañaque. Because of its enduring popularity among Filipinos, the Zarzuela has been successfully revised also. Revitalized Zarzuela include Bienvenido Lumbera and Lucien Retabas, Hibik at Imagsik ni na Victoria Lactao at iba pa, about the abuses committed by American soldiers on the people of Batangas during the Philippine-American War of 1899 to 1907. Okay. Today, contemporary theater is confronted with many challenges. Okay, so I'll go into the prospects. Today, contemporary theater is confronted with many challenges, most important of which are the phenomenon of globalization, as represented by Game of Thrones, the dominance of film and television, as represented by Kathniel, and the socio-political conditions confronting the country since 2016, represented by this beautiful pieta by Rafi Lerma. Ang ganda nung magkatabi si Kathniel dun sa, di ba? Sinadya namin yan. To show you the conflict of in our minds, diba? Okay. Globalization first has been defined as the movement to create an integrated global economy marked by free trade, the free flow of capital, and corporate use of foreign labor markets to maximize returns. More broadly, the term applies to the movement of people, knowledge, and technology across international borders, as well as the free flow of cultural, environmental, and political discourse. Aided by advanced technology and telecommunication, globalization is supposed to quote-unquote spur more interaction and integration between the world's cultures, governments, and economies. The Philippines officially endorsed the terms of globalization when it joined other nations in signing treaties that ensured the implementation and acceleration of globalization, notably the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, nag-remove ng tariffs sa lahat ng bansa. Since then, the effects of globalization, both positive and negative, have been felt. Because of globalization, more Filipino professionals and skilled workers have found jobs abroad, whose earnings have helped to keep the local economy afloat. However, the prolonged absence of these workers from their homes have often resulted in the personal and social dislocation of the family members left behind. The same thing, while unregulated free trade has definitely benefited large multinational corporations from the industrialized West that were able to access sources of cheap labor and expand their markets in many countries through globalization, it is doubtful whether the impact of globalization on workers and small businesses in the Philippines, such as the shoe and garment industry, has really been positive. Halos pinatay yung garment industry natin. Okay, in the realm of culture, globalization has brought about a rapid exchange of artistic works and philosophies, as well as worldviews and value systems among cultures, mainly through the internet and other new media that have become available by almost everyone, even in developing countries. Because of this, Filipinos have been able to access foreign movies and TV programs, music, dance, and theater performances, such as Hamilton, a very excellent production, documentaries on visual arts, architecture, literary arts, and performing arts, and simultaneous coverage of important events in foreign countries. While such opportunities have presumably enriched Filipino artists and expanded their artistic and intellectual horizons and their vocabulary of expression, for example, exposure to Hamilton is really very important for Filipino artists because the techniques that were used for the days are things that could be used by Filipino artists themselves. They have also immersed Filipino artists deeper in the culture of their former colonizer, further strengthening the colonial bias in our culture and arts. Similarly, globalization, which should have led to the fair exchange of artists among nations, has privileged the move over of Broadway performances to the Philippines, which get the lion's share of the funding from local business corporations to the prejudice of local performing groups. And because it is the cultures of Europe and America and their imitators that dominate global media, as well as the local stage, globalization has in fact tended to further devaluate or erode Filipino culture and language, and to favor the propagation of a single world culture, which in substance is that of the US first and Western Europe second. No wonder some critics have called globalization the latest form of American cultural imperialism, also known in the 1970s, in my time, as the McDonaldization of world cultures. But globalization, no matter how pervasive its effects, must not be allowed to destroy the cultural identity of the Filipino. And this because only the affirmation of the Philippines as a nation with its own history, culture, goals, and priorities is capable of transforming the country from just being a mere appendage of the global powers, whether as sources of cheap labor, raw materials, or as markets for their products, or as passive recipients of foreign culture, into a nation that can stand on its own, working its own problems, as it builds an economy, government, and culture that are primarily in the service of the people. No global power can and will do that for the Philippines. So that in the end, it is still the nation that must fend for itself, globalization or no globalization. And it is precisely in the task of building the national identity that the arts are indispensable. In particular, theater today has provided the necessary space for the interpretation and discussion of socio-political issues as it has done in decades past. The picture is from Isang Araw sa Carnaval, which is about martial law. Original Filipino plays have served to hold up a mirror to our vices and virtues, satirized or condemned abusive leaders, celebrated the selflessness and bravery of Filipinos who in the past had fought the oppressors of their people, gave us a glimpse of the cruelty and the nobility that we're capable of. And in doing all this, defined the image of the Filipino in our time. With similar endeavors now happening in indie films, the visual arts, dance, music, and some broadcast arts, the arts have truly become the barometer of our times, the beacon for social change, and the markers of identity. In the picture is Abra in Respeto. Right? A second challenge that faces the theater today is the dominance of film and television. Mainstream cinema's commercial rom-coms, like This Time, comedies, like Fantastica, and horror movies, like Shake, Rattle, and Roll Forever and Ever, enjoy a huge B, C, D, and E audience patronage the theater never had or will ever have. Few as they are, these genre movies with big budgets, popular stars, and multimedia publicity have grabbed the lion's share of the market, leaving artistic indie films to survive on festival grants and exhibitions and a small niche market of students and professionals. On the other hand, commercial television stations have raked in huge earnings from the local and even international market into telenovelas, both Filipino and foreign, whose stories are a throwback to the theater melodrama of the early 20th century, which revolved around mistaken identities, marital infidelity, oppression of children, enmity between rich and poor, the duplicity and opportunism of corrupt politicians and crooked businessmen. In the past, when Zarzuela characters and stories were replicated on screen by the new sound films, you remember, during this Zarzuela period, during the American period, dumating ang pelikula. Nagkaroon ng sound from 1933. So ang unang pumasok sa pelikula, yung mga theater forms, especially the Zarzuela, kasi may sound na right? Hindi nakakope ang Zarzuela, namatay siya on stage. Right? Namatay siya. Kasi, it was just replicating what already is in another medium in a more effective way. Right? So the stage Zarzuela declined and eventually disappeared, mainly because it had become redundant, superfluous, and outmoded in the face of its exact counterpart now cast in a novel and exciting form, the cinema. Theater today would have suffered the same fate if it merely repeated the narratives of mainstream cinema or television. But this is far from the truth, because contemporary theater has long outgrown or eschewed the romantic dramas and comedies of its past that are now the staple of rom-coms and telenovelas. Instead, today's theater grapples with pressing social or psychological issues in the country using a variety of styles ranging from realistic to expressionistic, and a range of genres from musical to historical to allegorical to revitalized traditional. Today's dramatic narratives prefer scientific description to moral prescription, and therefore avoid coincidences or deus ex machina that traditionally led to closures consonant with the dicta of the ruling government and the church establishment, as seen in today's commercial cinema and television. If anything, contemporary theater provides the foil to the stories and themes of commercial cinema and television, offering Filipino audiences not escape, but engagement with the realities confronting them in real life. In the picture is Filipinas Kong Mahal with all the overcoat, which is about trolls. Because it is free of the censorship that film and television have to constantly contend with, kasi may NTRCB, theater can speak the truth that film and television could only hint at most. Because becoming too realistic on TV promptly and invariably invites censure. For example, Provinciano, remember? They got into trouble because what they were showing was getting to be too real. Lastly, theater casts a magic effect on its audiences that could never be achieved by film or television, an effect that results from the interaction between live performers and live audiences. When rapport is established between the two, the insights propounded by the play create a deeper mark in the minds and hearts of audiences. The third challenge that confronts theater artists today are the socio-political conditions that have changed drastically and swiftly since 2016. From the beginning of his presidency, the current president has launched a strongman rule that has waged three wars: the war on drugs, the war on which has resulted in thousands of EJKs among the poor, the war on memory, which has revised history by presenting Marcos's martial rule as a time of peace and prosperity, and the war on truth, which has targeted media persons critical of the president and employed trolls to spread fake news and defend the president against all criticism, valid or not. As in the martial law period, theater artists were among the first, if not the first, to react to the three wars of today. This is not surprising, since many leading theater artists lived through the period of martial law, or even became victims directly or indirectly of martial law abuses and atrocities. Moreover, theater artists have progressive organizations and networks in schools, communities, or the society at large that can easily be harnessed to respond to social issues immediately. Also, theater as performance is a volatile art form that is not easily censored and is considered a small medium, quote unquote, meaning with a small reach compared to print, radio, television, film, and the internet, and therefore is, quote unquote, not dangerous. In the past 3 years, theater groups, professional, school-based, or community-based, have on their own initiative produced more than 30 plays dealing with authoritarian leadership, like Anton Juan et al.'s RD3RD is Richard III, right? The wars on drugs, like Maynard Manansala's Tao Po. The war on memory, like Floyd Quintos's The Kundiman Party. The war on truth, like Lisa Magtoto's Game of Trolls. And other anti-people proposals of the administration, like, at present, Charot, PETA's Charot on Federalism and Charter Change. Conclusion. Philippine theater today displays a vitality and urgency that surprises theater enthusiasts of whatever persuasion. For one, this theater has finally come into its own, at least as far as subject matter is concerned. An amazing range of characters portrayed either as individuals or types, from sales girls to landed gentry, from boxers to corrupt politicians, from dictators to human rights activists, epic heroes to gay caregivers, as well as historical characters from Andres Bonifacio to Valentin de los Santos, all move and speak in situations relevant to the contemporary Filipino. In the picture is Tanghalang Pilipino's version of Ibalong, the musical. Urgent too are many of the issues that these plays speak about: exploitation of farmers by landlords, the dislocation and persecution of lumad groups, the heartaches of Filipino workers abroad and their families in the Philippines, the dilemmas faced by personalities in Philippine history, the corruption in government, the violation of basic human rights among the poor and the powerless, the travails of comfort women during and after the war, the continuing search for desaparecidos, the massacre of the Lapiang Malaya, the EJ case, and the spread of fake news. In the picture is Evening at the Opera, Floyd Quintos's play about this corrupt politician. Slowly but surely, Philippine theater is finally coming to fulfill the most basic expectations of a theater for Filipinos: the faithful depiction of native experience, the perspicacious interpretation of the many realities Filipinos struggle with, the vital expression of the Filipino needs, concerns, and aspirations, and the use of dramatic styles that are rooted in Philippine ethnic or folk traditions and or enriched by foreign dramatic contributions. As these needs, expressions, aspirations, and dramatic styles coincide more and more with those of the majority of Filipinos and of the nation as a whole, the closer will this theater grow toward becoming a truly national theater by and for all Filipinos. Maraming salamat po.